There are countless ways to scale a brand, but none of them really matter if you don't build a strong foundation first. Your business needs two core systems, absolutely locked in if you ever want to reach 8 figures on Amazon. First is your maintenance engine, and the other is your growth engine. So let me show you how to get them up and running. First of all, let's clarify something that most sellers get wrong. When we talk about systems and processes, those are really two different things. When we take a look at a process, that is essentially your workflow, right? A series of tasks and decisions, the logical workflow, how you get things done. And of course, you can have one process feeding into another process, your PO process feeding into your shipments, right? These two happen in a sequence. But in order to turn your processes into systems, we really need to start thinking about other things as well. We need to start thinking about technology, right? How do we actually perform these tasks? How do we make these decisions in the workflow? So once we figure out that one task can be done with automation, other task requires us to use tools like Excel, maybe Helium 10, and maybe some communication with the team happens on Slack. Once we start implementing the technology and accountability, where we define who is accountable for what, right? Supply chain manager for one task, the CEO is accountable for a decision in this process. We are turning that into a system. So essentially, then our system is a combination, right? A sequence of interconnected processes within the system, accounting for the technology and the accountability, right? So we have people, we have the workflow, and we have the technology that helps us to actually do the thing that we want to do. And of course, your business consists of multiple systems, right, that are also feeding into one another. And this is really important to understand for what we are going to do right now. Because our systems, we can categorize them into two different categories, right? We will have maintaining and growing. Systems that help maintain our business and systems that help us grow it. And if you are not sure, you can always ask yourself a simple question. A particular system in your business, if you focus solely on that, would it help you, let's say, double your business? Well, when it's a supply chain management, you can do whatever you want, you can optimize it however you want, but it's likely not gonna double your business. On the other hand, product development, that would be a good example of your growth engine because it absolutely can double your business. So we have these two categories, maintaining and growing. Now, with this out of the way, we can actually take a closer look at our two core engines we are going to talk about today. When we have a high-level systems map of all of our systems in the typical Amazon e-commerce business, we have our core systems, right? Which looks something like this. This is essentially a very high-level representation of how our business creates value. It all starts with product development, right? As I mentioned, this would be our growth engine. It feeds into supply and inventory management. That is our core maintenance engine. Then we have marketplace operations, marketing, and customer service, right? From a high-level perspective, this is how the business works. Essentially, every e-commerce business operates like this and has these functions. Of course, we have some support systems. We are not going to talk about these today too much. Some finance, human resources management, and the actual systems development, like working on the business. So these support systems help us to run the core systems, and those are the ones that create value. Those are the ones that actually make us money. Now, when I'm creating the engines, I'm always using our custom developed AI, which I basically developed and trained on all of my projects with my clients. With over 100 brands I work with, systemizing, I use the data, everything I've learned the past 8 years, and put it into custom trained AI. So I'm using it myself. You can get access to it. There is a link in the description. Now, when we are building the engines, we are following my simple framework, right? And we will follow these steps to actually build out these engines. And you can follow me to do this because, as I said, these core engines are working very similarly in most businesses. So very likely you can just take what we built here and implement it into your business. So these two core engines, the core maintenance engine will be our supply and inventory management, and the other one will be our product development pipeline. And these are the two core systems, the two core engines I focus on with every single seller I work with, right? It doesn't matter whether the seller is at 2 million or 20 million. This needs to be absolutely locked in before you can focus on anything else, because this is how the business actually operates. Your inventory management and supply, that is the backbone of your business. If this doesn't work, nothing else matters. Like if you're not in stock, you can be the best at PPC, you can have amazing products, nothing matters. And if you don't really launch new products consistently and really develop something your customers need, well, then it's very hard to grow. So let's begin with the core maintenance engine. It all starts with our inventory management, and we will start by actually separating the system into different processes, right? Remember what we talked about at the beginning. The first process where it starts is forecasting. We need to forecast how many units we need. We need to determine the right order quantities, the restock quantities, and actually understand everything that happens with our stock, right? All of the volatility, seasonality, sales volume, all of the inputs. So when we draft it, it looks something like this, right? We will have our inventory forecasting routine, and this is the starting point. And here, it starts with frequency, right? You can set weekly, bi-weekly, monthly frequency, whatever works for you. But when we are building this, we want to make sure that this is the starting trigger, right? This determines if we order any units, it determines whether we send units from our 3PL to Amazon. This is the core routine that needs to happen. And as we build this process, of course, there are some other processes that are feeding into this one, right? Let's not overcomplicate it for now, but another important step, if you remember our framework right here, when we're mapping out the high-level workflow, is to already think about streamlining it. How are we going to leverage tools and automations and software, right? The technology we are going to use to perform these steps, the tasks, and make the decisions. And also, what will be the KPIs? What will be the stuff that we actually measured? Right? Because this is very important to understand the metrics we want to track for every single process we develop and for our core systems right here. I like to note it down. Essentially think about it this way, right? What are the key metrics I would like to see as the owner? If I'm detached from this, I'm actually not doing the work. I just want to see the numbers and know whether it's performing well or not. So I know where to troubleshoot, I know where to step in. Because the whole idea behind creating this is that we have then someone else actually running this system for us. So I need to determine what are the key metrics I want to track. So I don't need to see what they're actually doing from day to day. I just need to see the metrics to see whether it's performing well. So of course, for our inventory forecasting, it will be tracking our in-stock rate, right? How many, the percentage of how much are we in stock. We can set some targets like 90, 95%, 98%. It depends on your business, how seasonal it is, and so on. So you will have some targets, and also forecasting accuracy, right? Combining the actual, sales, the actual forecasting of our seasonality, our lead times and everything. We just want to make sure that our forecasting is as accurate as possible, because if it's not, we then need to make improvements, right? These two key numbers, the KPIs, will let me know everything I need to know about our forecasting process. Now, of course, the forecasting needs to be done with a tool. I like to use spreadsheets. Of course, I know that there is software, third-party tools, and this is then where we figure out what is the best for your business. In some cases, it's a simple spreadsheet. In other cases, it's a third-party tool, right? In other cases, it may be some automation. But in this case, we identified that the custom tool spreadsheet will be the best solution to actually do this thing, the technology that we will use in order to do this step. Now, once we forecast the inventory, it feeds into two different processes. It depends whether you have 3PL or you ship directly to Amazon. One of them, which will always happen, is to determine the reorder quantities, right? We forecasted that we're going to need some stock, so we have the reorders process, right? Determining the reorder quantity, and then it feeds into the next, which is purchase orders. The other one here is restocks, right? So in this case, if you have a 3PL, you are shipping units from your 3PL to Amazon, and your forecasting helps you determine how many units, right? So this can be done with an automation, right? So when we do the forecasting, we know we want to keep, let's say, 30 days worth of stock in Amazon, and this automation can do these calculations, because the short-term forecasting, let's say we ship, multiple shipments per week, so we want to automate it. So that will be the technology we will use in order to perform this particular step. Now, this, as I mentioned, the reorders feed into the supply, which is purchase orders and shipments. Same thing right here. I draft the workflow, in the purchase orders, what needs to happen, like creating the PO, paying deposit, closing the PO, inspections, and all of that stuff. I will also determine what are the key metrics I want to track. Again, I am detached from the process and I just want to see if it's performing or not. So one of the metrics I would track would be production time, right? I want to make sure that our supplier is actually meeting our requirements, meeting the deadlines. So production times and defect rate, right? Especially depends on what niche you are in, but this could be a big issue. We want to track it and potentially raise this issue with our supplier. So this, of course, is a data we get from our inspection reports. Now, for this, creating PO, again, we are thinking about the technology. How are we going to do this, right? Every single time, should I, type the number of units and do the math on my pen and paper? Like, probably not, right? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to have templates. I'm going to have a template email for each supplier, including all of the information, because I want to streamline this. That's what the technology does for us, right? And I also want to have a custom tool. Ideally, again, I can build a spreadsheet for that. I can potentially create an automation that once I create the PO, once I have the order, I just click the button in my spreadsheet, the automation sends the email that I already templatized, and again, I'm saving myself time. When it comes to automating and using the technology, we always have to take into account how much work it actually takes to build the automation, to build, to streamline the process, versus how much time I'm actually saving. Because I often see people trying to automate something that, they place one PO a month and they want to automate it. It takes them 1 hour and they want to do it in 30 minutes. Well, that's probably not your bottleneck, right? You need to think about it that way. How much time is our company and resources is going to save by implementing technology, third-party solutions, automations, building out complex tools, right? So in a lot of cases, having something simple that helps us avoid errors is all we need. The next process it feeds into will be our shipments, right? Shipping the units once the goods are done, shipping the units, whether it's directly to Amazon, to your 3PL or wherever else, we need to ship the goods, right? So again, we draft the workflow, not gonna get into too much detail, but then I determine the key numbers which I want to track. In this case, cost per CBM, right? Great indicator that really our cost of goods affected by this. So we want to track it. That of course is our shipping. Transit times, again, because we are not always balancing costs. Sometimes we need speed as well. So transit times and also percentage of damaged goods, right? Sometimes it happens that the forwarder actually damages your goods. So we want to make sure that it arrives in a good condition. In this case, again, we are likely reaching out to multiple forwarders. So we want to have templatized, ideally even some automation where we create our shipping plan. We want to click a button, send to get a quote from, let's say, 5 freight forwarders. So we get the best deal in terms of money and speed. Templatized email. So as you can see, I'm building it out from the high level. I'm just mapping out the workflow. And as I said, in most cases, you already have some of these, right? You already have these templates. Maybe you have your custom tools for forecasting. Maybe you already use something. But the idea is that we want to make it very comprehensive, very streamlined, and actually understand how things happen so we can hand it over to someone else, be more efficient, minimize the errors, right? That is the whole idea behind systemizing. And of course, one of the processes here, the shipments, as I mentioned, from 3PL to Amazon. Here we determined how many units, but actually the delivery, right, from the 3PL, sending to, notifying the 3PL, sending it to Amazon. So all of these steps, again, a lot of this stuff can be automated. And lastly, very important, and I see a lot of people actually skip this, is monitoring, being very proactive about your supply chain management, right? So this should be routine. As you can see, a lot of these are triggered. A lot of these processes are triggered by something that happened before them, right? I determine in my inventory forecasting that I need to order units. That triggers my purchase orders process. But in this case, it's triggered by a routine. I want to do it every week. And I found this extremely valuable whether you have your supply chain manager or yourself being very proactive, on a weekly basis, review every single PO, every single shipment to actually make sure that we are proactively pushing everyone. We are proactively on top of things. There are no delays, right? Fixing loose ends. Here, we need some report template for that. So me, as the manager, I can quickly review it. I don't need to have a call. I have a standardized report to see if there is any troubleshooting required. And as you can see, this is a common theme in systemizing, right? I don't necessarily want to spend my time in meetings. I just, at my own time, I want to see, ideally, numbers, reports to make sure everything is running smoothly, because this is the maintenance engine, right? It's not really rocket science, but we just need to be on top of things, right? And these reports will help us do that. And also, one last thing here, on a quarterly basis, or if your business is bigger, you will probably want to do that on a monthly basis, actually updating the inputs. And by inputs, everything that feeds into our inventory forecasting. That will affect the inventory forecasting accuracy if we have the right inputs, like lead times, seasonality, shipping rates. All of these inputs we need to track and analyze, because otherwise we are just pretty much blind, right? They are fluctuating, the prices, the cost, the shipping cost, the lead times can fluctuate, the production times. And if these numbers are off, our forecasting is off, and then you constantly run out of stock. And again, we kind of have this metric here, our in-stock rate and forecasting accuracy. And if this goes down, well, it's likely because our inputs are not correct. So we need to proactively update the inputs, review with the manager, right? And then we are done with the supply chain. Of course, later on, I will talk also about the actual tools, right? Getting a bit deeper into that and setting up your execution hub. So we have a lot to cover. But before we dig into that, I want to focus on the high-level growth engine, which in this case, as I mentioned, is our product development pipeline, right? So we have three core processes. The first one is our research and development, right? This is where we come up with new products and we develop them. Again, the complexity really depends on your business. Some businesses I work with, they launch 4 products, 3 products a year. It's a very complex process. They have molds, they work back and forth, a lot of samples, quality testing. This is especially for products that you are creating from scratch. With other sellers, it's just running as a machine. They are launching 5 products a month because they already have the supplier and they are just creating variations, and coming up with different products to launch with the same suppliers. So sometimes it's a little bit more complex, but this is the most common structure I see, right, when we implement it with sellers. And then again, it was exactly the same structure we had in our own business. Now, product research routine, right? It all starts with generating product ideas. I call it product research, but at the end of the day, it is ideation, right? In some cases, you begin by researching gaps in the marketplace, but once you have a brand, you don't really try to find, winning products. You're actually thinking from the perspective of the brand. So rather than just researching the numbers on the marketplace, you actually ideate how to make new products, how to make better products, right? So we will need some ideation framework, and what we will be tracking is number of ideas generated, because this is the lead indicator, right? At the end of the day, the number of products you launch is determined by the number of products you come up with, number of ideas, right? And then you can kind of connect the relation between those two. If I can say out of 20 ideas, I launch 1 product. So I know that on average, if I want to launch 5 products, well, I need to have that many ideas. Thinking in terms of the lead indicator, very helpful. Now, ideation framework. Of course, the technology here, extremely helpful. AI, right? It can help us a lot to actually figure stuff out, give us ideas, and also help us figure out differentiations, making the product better, right? So that is a whole another topic, right? How to use that, but the technology, AI, right? 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when I actually was, launching products, I had to do it all manually, didn't have AI, but nowadays it works very well. So then the next step is actually verification or validation of the idea, market analysis. Now we have the idea and want to see how it fits into the marketplace, because sometimes the numbers won't work, other times the competition is too strong. So now we're kind of going through these filters, right? So I always like to see the product development as a funnel, right? From the ideas, from a rough idea, looking at the marketplace, the verification, validation, profitability, before I even commit to launching the product. Now, again, for this, we should have some custom tool to help us go through these filters. Also, a good metric to track is the time to validate, right? How long it takes me to have the idea and either eliminate it or move it forward in the pipeline, right? Is it a month, to get the samples, get the ideas? Is it 14 days? Because this will also help us determine how quickly we can launch new products. And then if the product passes the validation, we will finalize it with the supplier, the packaging, all of that stuff. And I also like to do like a final profitability analysis, because at that point where we have all of the inputs, everything we know, the packaging, the labeling, all of the prices, I like to do like a final profitability analysis. And again, for that, we should have our profit calculator. And as you can see, a lot of these tools, I like to use spreadsheets. I still think that the level of customization is still incredible. And if you can use it to find a third-party tool, software, perfect. But at the end of the day, if you have someone in your business who is great with spreadsheets, that's perfect, right? And then, if it passes, then we finish the development. So then we have the next process, which also I forgot here to mention one last metric, the idea conversion rate, right? How many ideas actually turn into products we move into development. As I mentioned, 20 ideas equals one product, right? What is the success rate, the conversion rate of my ideas, right? It may sound like, it's not necessary, if it's just you. But if you have a product development specialist, you want to track this, because as I said, it will be your lead indicator, how many ideas you generate, time to validation, that will be your indicators. And if, let's say, idea conversion rate is, 2%, well, then your ideation framework is not great, right? So you kind of want to balance these things and always drive it back to the actual process, right? If this number is not good, I need to go back here and see like, hey, this is not good. Right? If time to validate, I need to see like, hey, the verification, there's something lagging here. So it's important to have your finger on the pulse of this. And then it fits into creating the listing, like preparing the product to launch once we have the product. Here you can see once the development is completed, it feeds back into the forecasting. Why? Well, because we need to determine how many units to order, and it feeds back into our maintenance engine. But at the same time, we want to create the listing, we want to create the product, how it runs, right? So we have our keyword research, listing content, listing images, right? That feeds into our PPC management, and then the decision point, checking whether we are happy with that. But what's important here, likely I will, for keyword research, all of that, we will use software. Not going to develop anything on our own, right? There are great tools that will help us do that. But here, this is important, right? Creating the listing content, having some brand guidelines in this, understanding the customer avatar, who is the person we are selling to, and how are we going to sell the product to them? What are we going to say? What are we going to show to resonate with them? To show them that we can solve their pain points better than anyone else. And having the brand guidelines or customer avatar, whatever you want to call it, framework, which we use to develop the listing content, the images, the copy, the video, everything, right? And ideally, it should be all on brand if you have multiple products under one brand. So this will be the tool that will help us do that. Then we have some internal listing quality rating, right? As the manager, if you want to review the listings before launch, you can have like your own personal scoring system. So if you are consistently not very happy with what your team produces, you can again tackle the brand guidelines. Maybe there is something wrong if this number, your internal subjective still listing quality rating is not good. Then we have setting up tracking, the software, again, using software like for keyword ranking, your profitability, like seller board, we will use that. And then having some launch checklist, to launch your products in a very machine-like way, right? We want to have this executed in the right sequence. It's a launch, right? So we want to do that. And once the product is live and launched, right? And also this needs to happen also once the product is delivered. So as you can see, our shipments feed into this point because we cannot launch the product until it's delivered. So these two engines are working simultaneously. Once it's launched, it feeds into our ranking, right? This is where we rank the product. That is a marketing process. And the third process here is evaluation. And I see so many sellers actually skipping this step. And it is incredibly important. Evaluation sheet, right? A custom report where we actually track the performance of the launch. After 3-4 weeks, you want to evaluate. look closely at all the key metrics, not just profitability, but everything. Have you managed ranked? What are the reviews? Is it a product we want to continue selling, right? If so, what are we going to do? What is the plan, right? So we will be evaluating the quality of the product, the product performance, the PPC, everything, and decide whether the product was successful or not. If it wasn't, we of course ask ourselves, can we fix it? Maybe it's a simple issue we can fix quickly. If not, the product failed, but hopefully the product was successful. And again, very important step to evaluate the reasons why either it was successful or even it failed. Because most people, if they're successful, it's like, my job is done, the product is selling, I'm making money. I always like to sit down and actually think why the product is successful in the first place, right? We had some hypothesis when we launched the product, and now was it true? What went well, what didn't go well? Either way, whether it failed or not, and create a custom database, especially with the combination of the ideation framework with AI, it can help us to really go back and put all of these lessons together. Because a lot of the times you have no idea why the product working, and you have no idea why the product failed. But we need to do our best to actually understand that. So the evaluation steps, it is a separate process. Most people skip it, right? And of course, we want to track number of products launched, hitting our KPIs, whatever it is, your ROI, your PPC performance, your ranking, whatever the launch KPIs are, right? And again, as the manager, as the owner, sitting on the sidelines, checking whether it's performing, this is the number you want to see, because at the end of the day, this is what matters most. Now, we covered the high level process. But as you know, in our framework, we covered this, right? We clarified the objective, we defined the high level workflow, we figured out how to streamline, what to measure. But in terms of the tools, right? If we take a look at the supply chain management, I talk about custom spreadsheets to give you a better idea what I mean by that. So we have the inventory forecasting. This is a spreadsheet, of course, that helps us see how our stock is changing based on our sales volume, but it includes so many different inputs. Again, this is very important, custom spreadsheet. Purchase order management, right? These are different tools that we will be building, and that is the technology that actually helps us run the engine, right? So then we have some shipment planner. I talked about this before, now just showing you examples what that could look like. And again, you can tell me, oh, Michael, I'm using this cool third-party software. Good for you. It doesn't matter at the end of the day if it's working, if it's doing what it's supposed to do, use it. Perfect. Then we have some supply data sheet, and this is really analyzing all of the key inputs we talked about, the shipping costs, the transit times, the defect rates, all of it needs to be tracked, because that helps me figure out where the bottlenecks in the process are, so I can not just try to make things more efficient blindly. I actually have this as an indicator to then step in and prioritize what needs to be fixed. I also like to map out the communication channels, right? Because especially supply chain, we have multiple people involved, multiple parties, inspection companies, suppliers, freight forwarders, 3PLs. So I like to map this out, who will be in charge of which communication channel. So in this case, my supply chain manager will be handling all of this. And with that being said, we will have a lot of different, communication with different parties. So having some technology, some software to help us efficiently manage our emails. So a lot of people I see this do that. They have, they let their team use, their personal inboxes. There is no transparency. Remember, it's you sitting on the sidelines, having the ability to quickly identify what's wrong and step in, fix it, optimize it, and having a proper email management like Missive, for example. I like that one because you can quickly see what's happening. Everything is labeled, everything is organized. You can and quickly replace, in the communication. Let's say your supply chain manager, gets hit by a bus and suddenly it stops and you don't have access to anything. Well, with this, you can replace them quickly and see how all of the communication was going with every single party involved. So this is incredibly important. Now, when it comes to the technology, for the product development, some ideation framework, I said, using AI, having some framework. Some people work with their suppliers, others, look at their competitors. So having your ideation framework specified so someone can replace you and do this job, your product development specialist. Some verification steps, we talked about this. Again, maybe you have something else, but again, having a tool that does the function, incredibly important. Then the brand guidelines, we talked about, having your customer avatar specified. This needs to be very clear because ideally your brand manager will be working with contractors to get this done. They will be working with graphic designer, photographer, copywriter, videographer, AI expert, whatever. But they need to have this specified what everything should look like, because if you have multiple people creating different assets, it can be all over the place. So first of all, you're understanding your custom avatar, your brand guidelines to put it all together and have it very nicely unified. So we have the contractors. I talked about the evaluation metrics, having the report of the product performance after launch, very important. And lastly, the email management. We will leverage the same technology even for our product development pipeline. And lastly, our execution hub. Once we designed this, now the hard work is done, but we also need to specify the execution, right? So we define the process maps, but we always have, our project, task management, and then company wiki. So what we're going to do is that now we have all of the technology here, the tools we're going to use, and we have the workflow here, the metrics we want to track. And so the last step is to actually just write instructions for the steps that are more complex and really need to be done to the T, right? So this is very, very important to have the SOP, right? We talk about procedures, but we are not creating blindly procedures for every single step. We are really picking the areas that are most important, or maybe it's using a specific tool that's complex. Let's say your supply inventory forecasting is very complex. So you create a quick Loom video, use AI. The one I showed you can do that for you to create an SOP based on a video. You put it there. We don't spend too much time creating this, but we need some instructions. What happened, how it happens, why it happens, and so on. And lastly, after you do your playbook, we want the actual task templates and trackers. This is your task management software like Asana, where the work happens, right? We clarified the steps, so we kind of look at the workflow here, the map, how it moves. So I see, okay, I'm going to need a routine task, reminder that happens every week, right? I'm going to need a purchase order. Every time I'm creating PO, I'm going through multiple steps. I'm going to need a template for that. Supplier shipments, I'm going to need a template for that, and I will go like this and create, because I have multiple POs, multiple shipments. And most of the time I do exactly the same thing. So I can just, put it into create a template here. So every time I have a new PO, new shipment, the person knows who is accountable. So it's like the process map is kind of what needs to happen. The instructions are how it's done. And lastly, in the task management is who's responsible, how many moving pieces, how many balls in the air. So again, me as the owner, I can sit down, open this and see supply chain manager has this many POs open, and I can open then any PO to see what is the progress, what is the stage, what's happening, do I need to do anything, right? Again, transparency. And the same goes for the product development, having a nice playbook, as I said, defining the ideation framework, the validation metrics, so I can hand this over to someone else, so someone else can ideally replace me in this. And lastly, designing the product development pipeline through going through these stages, right? We talked about this, having as a pipeline from research to development, creating listing, ranking, and lastly, evaluation. So I have it designed as a pipeline. So it moves through the stages. And if I have 10 products in the pipeline, again, as the owner, I can see beautifully how it's happening. I can see what my team is doing, right? They know what to do, most importantly, right? I'm tracking the key metrics, and that's really all it's about when designing and systemizing your business. Now, what to do next is to watch a video where I go step by step designing entire operating system, from building and systemizing like this to actually building a team, to creating a strategy, from engines, people to strategy. It's an hour long, pretty much everything I've learned over the 8 years in the business. So go ahead and watch it now. There will be a link on the screen. And if you want to use the same AI I trained based on everything I've learned, there is a link in the description. It's a part of our brand systemizer toolkit. So you will get access to it. It's custom trained ChatGPT. And that's pretty much it. So I'll see you next week. Bye.